Hello and welcome to The One Show with Alex Jones.
And Amol Rajan. Now, there were about 136 million Americans who cast a vote in the last year's presidential elections. But it really came down to about 40,000 people.
Indeed it did. And if they had voted for tonight's guest instead of Donald Trump, right now she'd be sitting in the White House and not on a green sofa. But hey, she's probably over that now. Let's find out by welcoming Hillary Clinton!
It's really great to see you.
Hillary it's so good to see you on the One Show sofa again. Thank you for coming in. Is even a little part of you over it now?
Well, I'm happy to be here, but as you said in your introduction, I'd rather be in the White House because I think there's so many great opportunities for our country and indeed for the world. So, you know, I'm fine as a person. I'm doing well. I write about it in the book. It's kind of a story of resilience and coming back. But I am worried about the country and the world. So, you know, that's my main goal right now.
Well, before we get stuck into the election, let's just clear the air a bit. So, Harvey Weinstein.
Right.
You once described him as a friend.
Yes.
How would you describe him now?
Well, he is someone who is different from the person I knew and the person who was involved for many years in Democratic politics for me and for Barack Obama and so many of us. He was very helpful, and it is just appalling what is coming out now. And I want to commend the women who are finally stepping forward, and I'm very glad they're getting support because it will take courage of women stepping forward, and it will take the rest of us supporting them to shine a bright spotlight, because this is not just about one person. No. This is a problem that we are discovering is endemic in many parts of society.
And the wrongdoing was clearly his and his alone. But you know, given what has emerged about him, do you think more people around him, given the rumours, given the stories that were often said about Harvey Weinstein, do you think more people, do you think you should have been more curious and braver sooner? Well,
I can only tell you that our connection with him was one that did not encounter these stories, which seemed to be, you know, pretty much circulating, if at all, in the entertainment world. And they didn't break out in a way that really raised questions among, you know, people like me or the Obamas and others who were, you know, very involved with literally hundreds of thousands of people. And so I regret that none of us knew about this sooner, that could have done something about it. And of course, he does face consequences. But I just want to underscore, it's not about one person. You know, I made a big point in trying to talk to people in my campaign about what President Trump said, describing his own conduct, which certainly was equivalent to sexual assault in the way that he talked about women. And women came forward. But it didn't get the attention, and it didn't raise the seriousness that now finally we're seeing. So I hope that continues and that people really understand they're not alone and they can come forward and action will be taken, whether it's in Silicon Valley or politics or anywhere else.
Well, Hillary's new book is called What Happened, which is what many people were asking when they woke up and heard the news about Donald Trump's victory.
And in it, Hillary describes the questions that she's asked herself many times. And so we thought we'd use her own words to look back at why a win for Trump seems so unlikely.
This American carnage stops right here and stops right now. This was locker room talk.
Do you believe in punishment for abortion? Yes or no, as a principle?
There has to be some form of punishment.
For the woman?
Yeah.
What about the guy that gets her pregnant?
Determined.
Is he responsible under the law for these abortions?
I would say no.
Total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists. He's a war hero because he was captured. I like people that weren't captured, okay? You gotta see this guy. Oh, I don't know what I said. I don't remember. We will make America great again.
before Hillary.
Oh, that brought back a lot of terrible
I'm sure it did.
Well, it's extraordinary watching your expression, actually, as you watch that. And I guess, given you had an opponent who had so many strong views, and negative, some would say, the question is why you lost. And, you know, the quote that really jumped out at me from your book was when you said, "I've come to terms with the fact that millions of people just don't like me." Why is that?
Well, I think it's several things, but most importantly, it's a concerted, persistent attack on me. You know, when I was Secretary of State, that's when I first met Alex. When I came to talk about the book I wrote about those experiences, I left that office with 69% approval, and I felt like I'd done a good job. The country agreed, and so when I decided to run for president some years later, the other side knew that they had to tear me down. And, you know, I made some mistakes they took advantage of, but they also engaged in this really horrible, relentless persecution of me. And they used online media, social media, to carry those messages. And they were aided and abetted by the Russians and had a very clear strategy that it wasn't so much about lifting him up as it was tearing me down and suppressing our vote. And people need to learn from that because it's not going away.
And it was largely, on reading your book, it was largely, in your view, because you're a woman. And one of the ideas that really struck me from your book was you said, in many countries, if you're a man, success breeds respect, but if you're a woman, success breeds resentment.
Yeah.
Is that an American thing? I mean, we're sitting in a country where we have 2 female political leaders. Angela Merkel's just got her 4th term in Germany. So is that an American phenomenon?
Well, the research that I was referring to in the book, in a chapter called On Being a Woman in Politics, which talks about sexism and misogyny, was based on American research.
Sure.
The more professionally successful a man becomes, the more likable he is. The more professionally successful a woman becomes, the less likable she is. And
That's
a woman,
true, isn't it?
it's
I mean,
so
you
true,
can't get
Alex.
away from it.
And the more that you look at it, it's very real world related, because in our country, if you are a woman advocating on behalf of someone else, you know, when I was in the Senate, I was representing, you know, millions of New Yorkers. When I was Secretary of State, I was serving President Obama. That is all viewed very positively. But when you're a woman who steps out and says, I want to lead in our system, that raises all kinds of questions. And you talk about your 2 women prime ministers. Kudos to you.
And Nicola Sturgeon in Scotland.
Well, yeah, and Scotland, and then Angela Merkel and other women you can point to. We are behind in the United States. And I'm hoping, having gotten the nomination of one of our 2 major parties, that maybe I've pushed that door open a lot more so that hopefully in my lifetime we can see a woman president.
You mentioned the Russians as well. I mean, to what extent do you blame the Russians for their interference then?
I think they affected the outcome of the election. And here's why. They engaged in an intensive campaign of propaganda to boost Trump, to denigrate me. They weren't sure they could get him elected, but they wanted to damage me. And they did everything from buying ads on Facebook to having tens of thousands of bots carrying their message online, to having young people in places like Macedonia creating fake content. They appeared to work hand in hand with the Trump campaign and the Trump allies like Cambridge Analytica. So we don't yet know how much cooperation existed, but the fact that they were able to what we call weaponize information, starting by stealing emails from the Democratic Party and from my campaign manager, and then making up the most outlandish stories based on those emails,
but are you angry,
affected voters.
But are you angry that President Obama, your friend, your colleague, your fellow Democrat, didn't speak out about Russian interference sooner? And have you confronted him about that?
I'm not angry, because I understand the predicament he was in. I was in the Situation Room as Secretary of State, advising on very serious matters, including going after Osama bin Laden. And I think the weighing of that inside the White House was, well, what do we say that doesn't look like we are being partisan? And they concluded, you know, not to say anything because he thought I was going to win. I mean, the night before the election, as I write in the book, he basically said to me, gave me a big hug and said, you know, I'm so proud of you, you've got this. Now, I think there's been a lot of second guessing by people in the White House, and here's why. You know, the American public knew about my dumb email mistake. It was the constant theme, and we saw the impact of the FBI director coming in at the very end and raising it one more time, and it really hurt me. Nobody knew about the Russian investigation that the FBI was conducting. And so when my campaign would say, the Russians hacked the DNC, the Russians are weaponizing this information, it looked like we were just trying to excuse, some of the dynamics of the race. And the fact that it wasn't ever confirmed by the FBI or anybody else in the government did hurt me. So it's mixed.
Okay. Well, Hillary describes the moment that she knew she'd lost as my worst fears about my limitations as a candidate coming true.
Of course, self-doubt after a big defeat isn't exclusive to politicians, especially those with a fortune to fall back on. So here's 3 One Show viewers to tell us how they bounced back from their lowest moment. Well, thanks to all of those who told us their stories there. To bring it back to you, Hillary, I mean, you reacted lovely to those women because you understand, but the night after the election, the morning after the election, after an insurmountable defeat, your hopes and dreams are in tatters. I mean, how did you manage just to get up out of bed on that first morning?
Oh, it was so hard, and I had not prepared a concession speech because I really thought I was going to win. So when it became clear I was going to lose the Electoral College, as you say, by 40,000 vote difference if it had flipped, I had to come up with something to say, had to go do it, had to keep going. And then when it was over, I got into the car with my husband and I just felt like the plug was pulled. Every bit of energy and adrenaline just was gone. And I got home, put on, some sweatpants and a fleece and just literally, just sat and thought. And then I figured, well, I've got to keep moving. Went for a lot of long walks in the woods, which I highly recommend. Getting out in nature, spending time with my dogs. Went back to my yoga practice. I talk about alternate nostril breathing. Again, I highly recommend it. Drank my fair share of Chardonnay.
I think that's always the fix, isn't
That's
it?
a very useful tool to bounce back. And I loved the segments we just saw because everybody has to bounce back from something.
Yes.
And I want this book to be not only about a political campaign and the challenges we face, not just as Americans, but as Western democracies going forward, but it is a story of resilience. And anything that I could say that might give some hope and some encouragement to somebody else who's facing their own disappointments would be wonderful.
Take us back to election night. What was the moment on that night that you knew that the presidency was slipping from your hands?
Well, we were disappointed early in the evening about 2 states, Florida and North Carolina, because we had really thought we were going to win Florida, and North Carolina was always a toss-up, but we'd worked hard there. But that was not the end by any means, because there are many ways to get to these 270 electoral votes that our system requires. Doesn't matter if you win the popular vote, as I did by 3 million, you still have to get these 270 electoral votes. And it wasn't until very late, midnight, slightly later, that it became clear it was not going to work.
And then you had to make some pretty difficult phone calls.
Oh, I did. I had to call Donald Trump.
How was that for you?
Well, it was surreal. It was not a call I ever thought I would make.
Can you remember what you actually said to him when he...
it's very difficult. I tried to recreate it for the book to some extent. I mean, he was as surprised as I was. I mean, all of the post-election reporting, he didn't think he was going to win. The people around him didn't think. And I said, look, congratulations, and I hope you'll be successful. And obviously, I would be available to help in any way on behalf of our country. Then I had to call President Obama and tell him how sorry I was because he had been behind me for, from the very beginning. And that was a painful call. But the next day said we need to give our new president a chance and we should all try to unite behind. But in the earlier clips that you showed, it shows me sitting on the platform for the inauguration, listening to his speech, which was so dark and divisive. Oh. And I thought, wait a minute, this is not right. Because what I think you should do, look, our elections are contested, and when you're elected, you are the president of all Americans, not just people who voted for you. And part of the job, and I've seen it from Democrats and Republicans who have won, is to try to bring the country together. And instead...
And he talked about American carnage.
He talked about American carnage. It was, as I say, a cry from the white nationalist gut.
But, you know, you've been through a lot of very, very difficult things in your life, and the sense I had reading your book was actually the moment when they called you and Bill Clinton's name out for that inauguration, and to take a deep breath, walk out, and look at Donald Trump holding his hand on the Bible. Is that the toughest thing you've ever done?
Oh, it was really, really hard. It may not be the toughest thing, but it was a really difficult one. And as I write in the book, I looked for a way to get out of it. I mean, I was there not as the other candidate. I was there as a former First Lady, because former presidents and First Ladies go. It's a sign of continuity for our country. And I thought, well, maybe if the other presidents don't go, we won't have to go. But, you know.
But they were going.
They were going. And so I said to Bill, we've got to go. And we went. And it was really, really difficult. And I remember, you know, grabbing his hand and holding on to it as we walked out. We sat with, you know, George W. and Laura Bush. The Carters were there. You know, when the Obamas came in, I caught Michelle Obama's eye, because, you know, this was just something that none of us had expected would happen.
No. Did you ever consider the possibility, Hillary, that he may be the right man for the job?
No, I don't think so. And you know, Alex, I would feel very different if I were sitting here and I had lost to one of the other Republicans. People who I disagreed with politically, but who I believed
could do the job.
Could do the job.
Yeah.
They were temperamentally prepared to shoulder the responsibility that is awesome on the shoulders of a president.
Yeah.
So this is different, and it is deeply troubling to many of us, regardless of party. A very well-known Republican senator just basically came out and said what many people think, which is like it's adult daycare time at the White House. There's an impulsivity. There is a kind of visceral reaction to being criticized, wanting to shut the press down, take away licenses of broadcast networks because they criticize him. I mean, the man has not been criticized 1% of the way I've been criticized over 25 years. That's part of the job. You know, you have to be willing to get out there and to take the heat, to do what you think is right for the country.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that's not what we're seeing.
Well, Hillary, we do have a surprise coming up.
Oh, good.
Yes,
Do you like surprises?
Sometimes.
It's no surprise that there are frequent references in Hillary's book to the suffragettes, women like Emmeline Pankhurst, who fought passionately for the right to vote.
But when it came to her daughters, Emmeline didn't treat them equally at all. Here's Ruth with the latest in our series of films on what the famous leave behind.
Of women's rights history. It's fantastic, isn't it? In such good nick as well.
It is. Whoever had it all those years took good care of it.
It's in fantastic condition. Well, thank you to the People's History Museum in Manchester for bringing this wonderful display in. It goes on display next May.
Now, from the Pankhurst family history to your family history, because we know you have British connections,
Yes,
Hillary.
yes.
But Swansea University wanted to dig a little bit deeper and find out more.
So they asked the One Show's genealogist, Kat Whiteaway, to do some digging. Welcome, Kat. So you've been doing some digging, Kat. Tell us what you discovered.
I have indeed.
Well, tell Hillary, I should say.
Exactly. I started with you and worked 11 generations back.
Great.
So we go back 402 years, back to 1615, when the first ancestor that I can find at the moment was Ambrose Parkhouse, and he was born in Somerset in 1615.
Oh, that's great, Kat. Thank you.
So just how British is Hillary, then?
Well, your heritage, 43% English, 13% Scottish, 31.25% Welsh.
Yes, up the Wales, Hillary.
No Irish.
What about Indian?
No Indian.
And how did the story move from the UK to America?
So one thing that I've discovered, so your dad's dad, Hugh Rodham, he left from his home in County Durham in 1882. He was 3 years old, but he was with his whole family. And they sailed from Liverpool to New York on board the SS Alaska. And then 5 years later, your mum's grandfather, Edwin John Howell, he left. He was on his own. He was 21. He had 2 pieces of luggage with him. And he also, by sheer coincidence, sailed on the SS Alaska.
Oh, you're kidding.
No,
That is so...
Isn't that a coincidence?
Oh, my goodness, yes.
Yeah. So that's fantastic. Two completely separate bloodlines. They didn't meet on board the ship, but they sailed to New York, and that's where they settled. And that's obviously how come you came to be born in America.
Fantastic.
That is wonderful.
There it is. So as you're part Welsh now, Hilary, I thought I'd teach
Nearly
you.
a third, as you say.
Well, exactly.
Whoa, yes.
So I'll teach you some Welsh very quickly. So if you could repeat, pleidleisiwch, it's very hard. Pleidleisiwch, can you say that?
Pleidleisio.
Dros Hilary.
Dros Hillary.
And igen.
Igen.
You've just said vote for Hillary in 2020.
Total ignorance. Well, I'm very excited about going to Swansea.
Oh, yes, you live
University.
by the sea. It's beautiful.
I'm really looking forward to that.
They've got some great ice cream as well. A big thank you to Hilary. The book, What Happened, is out now.
Indeed it is. Next week, Steve Buscemi, Christian Slater, Martin Clunes, Jessica Rain and Kit Harrington will be here. Have a fantastic weekend.
Have a lovely weekend. Bye.